Welcome back to the Kurative Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Sutarji, and today my guest is Jessica Gutierrez, who is an artist and educator and also one of the coordinators of Martha Street Art. In this episode, she gives me advice on how to lead, on how to teach, and we talk about offering a creative space with inclusion, which is a very important topic, especially today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, rate and write a review for my podcast, and enjoy the show. Cool. Thank you, Jessica, for coming to my podcast.
Thank you.
So I know that you're an artist, you're an educator, you do so many things. You're a community manager for Martha Street Art. Why don't you kind of talk about how you got started with everything? And, we'll get to each and every part from that.
Okay. I think that there's multiple avenues, I guess, that I got to where I am. Through like reflection, I'm starting to realize all these pieces that are interconnected. But I started working, I guess, 2-3 years ago at a coffee shop called Social Policy, SOPO, downtown.
Where's that at? Downtown San Jose?
Yeah, you know, like where Johnny Rockets is?
Oh, I'm not that familiar with San Jose.
So if you just go straight down First Street, there's like the light rail right by Chavez Plaza. There's a coffee shop there called SOPO. So I had started working there. I found out about it through a friend. I was finishing up my first semester of my teaching program, my credential program, and I was looking for a job because I had just been nannying a lot, and I ended up working at this coffee shop. And then simultaneously, my friend Bree, she was the one that connected me with that space. Mm-hmm. I started getting involved as an intern and doing work trade for a yoga studio, a donation-based yoga studio called Be the Change. And that was also on First Street. So working through these spaces, I started to see that like a lot of the arts and like music community kind of converged onto First Street in downtown San Jose. Because prior to that, I lived in San Jose since 2013, but I was like really in isolation for a lot of that time, just as a student at San Jose State.
Okay.
Wasn't really familiar with what was going on like in the world of San Jose. Mm-hmm. So I had worked at SOPO. I met a lot of like artists through that space. Mm-hmm. And then I would meet a lot of people that were customers. So like Isaiah from San Jose Come Up, he used to be a regular there. I didn't connect that until later on, but there were like all these faces that I started to see. Right. And then I would walk to work every day and I started to see like the faces that were always down that little plaza area. Mm-hmm. There's Phil's Coffee on like 4th Street. I lived at an apartment next to there. So every day I would walk to work and I'd kind of see the same faces over and over again. And then I was working for Be the Change, starting to get involved in like the wellness community, mm-hmm. And meeting other folks in the community through that space. So I guess that was kind of like the starting point. In terms of getting directly involved in the arts community, in November of 2018, I had decided that I wanted to start putting on art shows. And so I didn't really deeply start getting involved until I started putting on the shows, because people started coming that I met from other communities. And then I started to attend their events, or I would go to like Cafe Stretch or different art shows for First Friday, mm-hmm. and just see who's around, like who's in my community, what people are here doing things that I can connect with and build community with. Okay, cool. So that was really like the starting point of it. Yeah.
So you said back when you were in college, you didn't really do much outside of SJSU, mm-hmm. But were you part of clubs or anything where you were doing events or mm-hmm. anything like that?
Not events. So when I had joined at San Jose State, I didn't know anybody. Okay. I think that when I went away to college, I was really excited to like learn, because I've always loved learning. Mm-hmm. So I was really excited to like have structure of my academics. And so I put a lot of energy into that and into my studying. And I started getting involved in the ceramics community. So we have the ceramics guild at San Jose State. And so I started connecting with people through that. And then I got really involved. Literally every day was going to the ceramic studio and creating and having this therapeutic experience with that community of like creating with my hands.
Oh, that's nice.
So that was probably like my first real experience of community in San Jose, at San Jose State specifically.
Okay.
But I wasn't in any sort of leadership role in that space. I wasn't doing any form of organization or curation.
Mm-hmm.
I was just more there like connecting with people on the common ground that we wanted to make clay things. So,
Okay.
so yeah, that was kind of like the extent of that. I also was part of the printmaking guild for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
They're called the Fresh Pressed Guild. So I was part of that for a bit when I started getting into screen printing.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, yeah, not really super involved, like super isolated. I felt really lonely for like a lot of my undergrad.
Oh,
and
wow.
then as I started to like get to know the spaces that I was in and the things that people have been doing before I even got to San Jose,
Right.
started to feel that connection to the people around me.
So it feels like what you experienced in San Jose, that sort of isolation kind of brought you to prevent yourself from being isolated after college, right? Would you say that like you grew into the role of leadership because, and we'll get to that later, but it seems that you're being more involved in the planning aspect, the execution, the curation aspect. How did you get to that point? Because if you weren't doing any leadership roles in college, you know, what changed?
I don't think anything changed. I think I've always been like a leader in my own way, like whether it's in group projects or I always would find myself taking on a leadership role. And I've learned that like even our dynamics if we do have a group project, right, in classes, it kind of depends on the people in that space, right? So if you see somebody else kind of taking on a leadership role, you may or may not like step back a little bit and be like, oh, someone's kind of taking it on. I can work with them. But if you see like this vacuum where like no one's really taking that space and no one's really like getting shit done, then you have to like, you know, if you have a group project and no one's doing anything, right? Like you're like,
then
okay, well, I don't want to fail. So like, let me do everything. Or let me start to delegate roles or try to create structure. So me taking on, I don't think it was something switched. It was more like I saw this space for literally a space, right? Like for my home, and starting to create something out of that. I don't think when I'm in it, I didn't think of it as a leadership position necessarily, but like it is, but that wasn't maybe my intention.
Sure.
And then through Be the Change, working at the yoga studio, although I started as an intern doing work trade, as I got more involved and then they needed support for their summer programs with their nonprofit Conscious San Jose, I started asking, hey, can I lead some like arts activities? And I started asking if I could get more involved because I realized that I had all of these resources that I wanted to share with others, and art is so vital to my well-being and I wanted to share that with others.
Right.
And so I just started seeing like these little, I guess like pockets where I could share with others. And that's really what like Martha Street's about, but that's also how I started getting more involved in the yoga or wellness community, however you want to categorize it. But just seeing these pockets of like need that I'm like, hey, I might not be able to fix these problems, but like I have this knowledge and I have these resources that I could share with others.
Cool.
Yeah.
So did you start Martha Street Night Art like really early on, or how old is that?
So that started in November of 2018.
Okay.
So that was the very first event that we had. We're about to have our 6th one. So yeah, that was the very first one. When I first started it, so my housemates and there's been like shifts of who lives in the home now, but we lived in this apartment downtown, right? And every year, so I've moved to San Jose in 2013. Every single year I've moved.
Oh, wow.
So I've lived in 6 different apartments since I moved to San Jose. But this place I moved into with my friends, I have a couple homies that live there that I've known for several years from San Jose State. And everyone that lived there is a creative person for the most part. Gabe, he's a ceramicist. I met him through San Jose State ceramics program.
Nice.
Jesse, I met through Gabe, but Jesse was really into like video and like film, like editing and photography, and started getting into graphic design. And Jose also liked to draw. So I was living with these people that love to create just to create. And so we would sit together at the table in the evening, like whenever our schedule synced up, because we all have like a million things going on, and we would just all draw together, you know, like
that's cool,
hang out and draw. So when I started the first event, I remember my housemate Gabe had made a joke about like, because whenever we'd draw, we'd like pin our stuff to the walls, right?
Yeah, I saw that. I attended one of the events. Yeah. For the audience that don't know, Martha Street Art is like an event where a lot of artists kind of showcase their work, and you have vendors, you have music, you have coffee. I saw last time.
Yeah, Tono was there last time. Yeah, cool. So the very first show was like super informal. Gabe had made a comment like, hey, like what if we had a gallery here? Like we basically have a gallery here, because we would just pin our like really crappy sketches to the wall. And I was like, yeah, let's do a gallery. And they're like, oh yeah, okay. And then I started like, I chose a date, and I was like, hey, it's going to be us. We're going to show our art, and let's invite a couple of friends to show their art too. So we invited my friend Aaron Pettigrew. And then we also invited my housemate Jose. He had a friend named Angel who he's like, hey, I know this guy that draws too. Like, can we have him? I was like, sure, why not? And so our very first show, and again, like they thought I was kidding when I made the comment. And then like I had made a flyer and I started sending it to people, because we had no social media for it at this point. I was like, I just thought like Martha Street, sure, that's like a temporary name. If I want to change it later, I can if it becomes a thing. But like, we live on Martha Street.
In San Jose.
Martha Street. Right. Yeah, in San Jose. So I had made this flyer, started like to text it to my homies. And then it's like a week away, and my housemates are like, oh shit, she was serious. She really wants to do this. So we started like trying to figure out like, okay, how are we going to do this? Like, what do we want to structure it like? And literally the first show was like up and down the walls. We had our art, like even sketches pulled from our sketchbooks, like super informal, pin our stuff to the walls. All my housemates, except for one, had like put their artwork up. And then the two other guys that participated. And the first one was really just like a rager. Like it was mostly like a party, like with art on the wall. Sure. And, you know, we had like gotten this keg that we were giving out for free, and it ran out in like an hour. And, you know, we just had like homies that we invited, and it was really just like a party. But
that's how it all starts.
That's how it started, right?
Yeah,
like,
super informal. You don't know what's going to happen. You're just having fun with friends and all that. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so that was the start. That was the very first Martha Street Art Night in November 2018. That was the very first one. Okay,
and since then, like, how has it grown? Because I know you have a team now that's, you know, behind the planning and the curation. How has it grown since then?
So each time it shifts based on what I learned from the prior time. So the very second show, I tried to curate the art a little bit more. I started using Google spreadsheets and like created Google forms to send to the artists. I'm like, okay,
trying to be more organized,
figuring out, okay, how can I get other people involved and making sure, because from there I was like, hey, like people really enjoyed this and had fun, and it's kind of cool to see people excited about art and like community. So for the second one, I'm like, you know, I really want to set an intention for holding space for artists that wouldn't necessarily have access to these spaces otherwise. Okay. Whether, you know, making sure that there's women, making sure there's people of color, making sure that there's like the queer and trans community represented, because inclusion can only really happen if you're like actively including those folks in your spaces. So was like, hey, how do I be intentional about this and start to reach out to folks that are like, they have some dope art. So then I started like utilizing, still didn't have an Instagram for ourselves, but I was using social media to like contact for my personal. And then so the second show, I don't remember if it was the second or the third show, we had like one or two performers. We had Emily, she DJ'd from our very first show, but we didn't have live performers other than that. And then my friend Renee, her boyfriend Christian, had brought a guitar, but we didn't have any equipment, so we had nothing to plug it into. So like no one could hear him playing, and I was like, I don't know anything about technical things. So like, well, he could still play guitar. He's having fun. But each time figuring out like troubleshooting. And then I think it was our third show that we had our first like more structured version of performances. And my housemate Jesse helped me with the lineup. And Brendan Quigley, he provided his sound equipment and he like managed the performers through it. And so I think it was like, I believe the third one, that was the first one where we had like a lineup.
Yeah.
And then, so it was interesting because as we started integrating performers, we started seeing different folks in the space because it wasn't only the visual artists, we were also celebrating the performing artists.
Right.
With the same intentions, right, of holding space for like those marginalized communities, underrepresented people, right? So each time it's like developed, like even the second event had vendors in the backyard, and then I realized it got so crammed because there was so many people in the yard watching the music performances that there wasn't space, and so each time I'm troubleshooting, figuring out logistical things,
just incrementally improving, which is the way to go. You can't get everything right the first time, right?
Yeah.
Or the second, or
the third, or even now, like each time it's going to be different because you even have like weather factors, right? And then the one we had in August, so that was our fifth one. And in between we had like one art exchange, which was, we had a couple resident artists that like had their work on display and people came and drew. Yeah. Because I always try to have every single event since the first one, we've had a community mural. And then sometimes there's been a drawing table where people, like for me, right, when I go into public spaces to socialize, I typically have a sketchbook with me because it helps me process the stimulus around me. And I see a lot of times for artists that get social anxiety, having those spaces is really important for them to feel safe and to still be able to be part of something without, getting anxious being around all these people.
Some people like to just stay in, do their work, and not really interact with people.
So allowing that space for them to, co-create with each other, but also like being able to sit there and like draw and do something they love and connect with other people that love to do similar things. So yeah, each time it's like grown a little bit, started to have vendors. We had the August one. That was the first time I had like a team. Okay. So I had one of my housemates that used to handle like the beer and the food. He moved out, and then the other housemate that used to help me with like the performance line out, he moved out. And they also helped me with all like the day of setup. So I'm well, shit, like I can't do this by myself, especially if more and more people are starting to attend, because there were like over 200 people attending after like the second event. There you go. And which is awesome, but I'm also like, wow, like I feel so overwhelmed that I want to do this thing. So I had put out a call like, hey, if you guys still want to see this happen, is there anyone that can like help me? And hell, people replied like they wanted to get involved, which made me feel like it was something important what was happening, and also I knew that I have my own biases, and like being in my own head is less likely to produce something that's like really for the community. But if there's more voices involved, then it's going to be more dynamic and it's going to include more perspectives.
That's interesting you say that, because I know obviously your vision is to have a space for people who are underrepresented to showcase their work, and I guess that's your North Star, I guess. The one point that focuses on like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Does that mean that you're kind of open with how it's going to be executed? Because you started out with artwork, you started out with music, but maybe things changed. Were you pretty open with those kind of changes?
What do you mean? What types of changes?
So like, for example, the first event, you had your vision of it, and then now that you're adding more people, they're adding their own ideas,
their own intentions and things, right? Yeah. So I think that retaining that core, like whenever when people did show interest, I broke down to them like, this is the core intention. How that manifests is going to be open for interpretation, but the core intention always has to be this thing of providing avenues or spaces for folks from these communities.
Right.
So that definitely was something that I communicated and something that I reiterate a lot. But also the people that wanted to get involved understood that.
That's good. Yeah.
And then like leadership roles, right? Because again, like I have no clue. I'm not a performing artist, so I was like, cool, your music's awesome. Let's have you perform if you would like. And not understanding any of the logistical stuff. But Olivia and Christian have been like the primary one. Like we're the Martha team now. So Christian, he also goes by Yes, that's his performance name. But
yeah, shout outs to everyone that's helping out.
Shout out to
Christian.
And Olivia. So Christian, he took on like the very first meeting. So the first day that like 6 people or so showed up that had contacted about wanting to get involved. We had a meeting and I remember we were all in the yard and Christian showed up. He had performed at our prior event, but I didn't really like meet him. I just said like, hey, what's up? I remember him like having his equipment and being there, not knowing if there was like a what do they call it? Sound check. I was like, is there a sound check? I don't know. Like maybe there is.
Whatever happens, happens.
Sure. Whatever happens, happens. It'll be cool either way. And, but Christian came the first day and he was straight up like, hey, this is what my feedback from the last event as a performer and as someone entering the space with like a perspective of a performing artist. And these are ways that I think that could be like mitigated better. And I would like to help you do that.
That's
and I was
great.
like,
yeah,
cool. Do you want to handle that? Do you want, and he really like took on this leadership position with that unique lens, right? Because I have the visual artist lens, but I don't have the performing artist lens.
Right.
And as much as I can like try to hold space for that, like I don't truly understand it, and I don't know the technical terms, and I don't know like what it's like to be, a performing artist.
Yeah, and like what we said before we started this podcast interview, it was, people have their own strengths, and like we should trust people to handle other strengths that you're not really good at. So that's cool that you're putting your trust into Christian.
Yeah, and also the fact, like, honestly, like when he first showed up and he was like critiquing, I'm like, the fuck, like this guy like this is like my first time sitting down with him, but that was like my ego, right? Like my ego shooting up right away. And then I was like, you know what, I really respect, like within a split second, like I respect him for like being honest and being authentic. And because I can't see outside of myself. Like I can't like I have my own biases. So from there he really supported the performance side. Like he's the performer manager, I guess. Like that's what I'm like, oh no, talk to Christian. Like I'm like, Christian's got it. And then Olivia, she's really been helping with like the flyers, and also she just like shows up and she has really good input and insight, has really good energy, and they're both just like the most loving people. And so I know that they like their core intention is community and love, and that's something that's really important to Martha Street too, is like understanding, right? It's not a business. People are like, you should make it a nonprofit. You should make money off this thing.
Right.
Which like I totally could, but that's not the purpose of it, right? It's community oriented, and really understanding like that there's this reciprocal exchange that exists beyond monetary exchange.
Definitely.
And understanding how we can share that with each other and be abundant in that, and knowing what co-creation really looks like.
Yeah, and I think what's amazing about that is that people are doing this and not getting paid for it. It's all volunteer work, and you can tell if they're still doing the work and putting their time and effort into it. They really believe in the vision. They believe that you guys can pull off a great event, and it's always amazing to see that, because I have people like that Let's Eat team over there. They're volunteer based, and they've had a team of 30-40 people, maybe even more, and it's because the vision is something that everybody believes in. And so it's nice to see something like Martha Street Art to have these events, follow this vision that you guys have and execute it. So I really give you guys props for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. And one thing that I've been really like, and again, it's always the struggle of like, okay, but we also like have to survive and like pay our bills, right? But
Of
we
course,
also want to
yeah.
like thrive and not be like stuck in this like capitalist like this or that system. Like it could be this and that, and we can like exist amongst all of the complexities. And that's something that I feel like I've struggled off and on with. There's a lot of folks that have recommended that I charge like entry, and it's something that I've struggled with a lot. And I'm like, no, the whole point was about access. And even if like I ask for $1 per person, like that dollar can mean a lot to somebody and can be
Fair
like
enough.
the one preventative factor of them entering the space, right? So super transparent that like there's no fee to enter,
Yeah.
but therefore there's like no pay for anybody, including myself and Christian and everyone. We meet literally every Saturday.
Yeah.
So it's something we're really committed to, and like I'm a true believer that if something is not flowing, that it's probably not meant to be. And so as long as something flows, it's meant to be. And if you hit a point where it's not, you either need to change something or you need to stop it. We haven't hit that point yet, but you know, I don't think anything truly like will really last forever. But I just want it to be authentic as long as it's happening. I just want like the experiences to be authentic. Now I had mentioned earlier, but we are going to curate 2 new events this year outside of the Martha Street home. So that'll be interesting to see like what's the difference, like what crowds that draws in as opposed to having it in a home and at the Martha house, right? Because that's a big appeal of it. But seeing like what other spaces that we can still provide a similar platform outside of the home, and hopefully provide more opportunities for those artists and performers to like make money and connect with other folks, because a lot of collaborations have come out of it, like music videos between collaborations. Like a ton of collaborations have come out of just like these events, or even connecting performers with each other, like, hey, we don't have capacity for 2 separate performances for you guys, but like, would you be interested in you know, collaborating on something or bringing your sounds together? And so it's been beautiful to see those types of co-creations.
Yeah, actually, I remember when I attended San Coachella last year, all the music performers ended up collaborating with each other.
Nice,
there was like Nobody Important, Shecky, Dov, Thick Rick, like all of those guys just met up, made music together. It's really cool to see that and like offer those opportunities for people to connect, to network. Shout outs to Smile High as well for the meetup. That's how we met, actually.
That's how you and I met.
right. And it's funny because like, you know, I don't think I would have met you unless we met through the meetup. I wouldn't have met like people from San Coachella unless I went there. And so it's hard definitely to not take in money, and it's amazing that you guys are able to do so much with your own time and effort, your own money and stuff like that. So it's hard. And do you guys, I know you don't want to take outside investments or anything, but have you guys thought about like how you might handle the situation when it comes where you're like, oh, we're hitting a limit, we're hitting that point, maybe when you, I don't know, like your plans for outside of the house, but you know, maybe there's a fee where you have to pay for renting a space or something. Have you guys talked about that? Have you figured out what you might be open to?
Because it is so grassroots, if I did take money from any sort of outside sponsor or whatever, or organization, it would have to be in alignment. But for the ones that we are the 2 events that we're curating, that's going to be at the 455 First Street, which is where Donut Day was.
Okay.
We are going to do a sliding scale entry fee. So that will be something that is unique. We're having to pay for insurance, but other than that, like, we don't have to pay a fee for the space because they really want to have like local people hosting things in the space and utilizing it, well, because it's going to be demolished, right? So it's just going to be a vacant space. So that's something, again, like this idea that we have all these resources and assets to share with one another. So I'm really grateful to have access to this space, and knowing that we can at least, even though we don't know upfront how much we can pay the artists, we know we can pay them because there is going to be an admission fee for it, right? And then thinking about like what other sponsorships we have been thinking about, like what sponsorships make sense for a specific event. So one event we're doing is a fashion show. So even things were like, well, if we have like disco balls or if we have mannequins, right? Like those are expensive. So are there any businesses that we could partner with, or could we like work with, I don't know, Black and Brown, and like there can be some sort of reciprocation where we could borrow their mannequins, but maybe they can be involved somehow, right?
What is Black and Brown? Sorry.
It's a, I guess like a consignment shop in San Jose.
Okay.
It's just like a small shop in, I guess on like the cusp of, I don't know if it's considered to be in Midtown San Jose, but it's like the cusp of downtown. And they do more like vintage wear, but that's just like an example of, a space like that where we can still utilize local resources, but maintaining that reciprocation. Like what is that reciprocation look like? Like what is this relationship? Is it one-sided? Is there exploitation on either side? Which I think is the larger problem of working with corporations or tech companies, is like, are they like, what is the reciprocation, or what is their intention versus ours? And I think that's easier to work with on a smaller scale. And then even thinking of what other businesses we can form a partnership with that are local, where there's something equally shared between the two of us. And so that is definitely something that we've been talking about. I applied for my first grant last year. And I still don't know if I won it. We won't know till March, but I'm like, hey, if I win this grant, I can pay all the artists, right?
That's nice.
So, I mean, there is the grant making process, but even that process isn't very accessible. And knowing that we all have like a million hustles in the Bay Area, like having the time to sit down and write a long ass grant isn't always like, you don't always have
top priority.
No, not top priority. Like I could probably, it would be quicker for me to like sell my liver than like to sit down and have to go through this grant writing process, because it's very similar to writing a scholarship.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
And then utilizing like specific language, gathering data, and it's a huge process. It's not easy. Like a lot of times people make it sound really easy.
Yeah.
And then also having access to the language that you need in order to acquire a grant, or the connections that you need. So for me, I've been really trying to, again, like that relationship building. That's kind of how I started getting involved in the art scene, but also like how I've continued to spread my involvement in it is just by like getting to know people, getting to understand what they do, what their intentions are, and how we can work together with other organizations and other folks in the community to help one another, support one another, to tap into each other for our resources. I think especially in San Jose, like with the issues around gentrification and the hostility like amongst communities and the tech companies, or whatever the wars are going on right in our communities, and then figuring like how do I navigate that, and how do I ethically find money. I do think that like since I've met David from Smile High, and I've met a few people like you and other performers and people who are curating events. I think there is actually a good enough community, like a local community, grassroots community in San Jose, that's like, you guys are all supporting each other, and I'm sure that someone will be there to help you guys out. Like I really believe that San Jose is really strong with that, and you guys will kind of fight through like all these issues. I agree. And I think also, I mean, we all have our day jobs too, right? Like
that's true.
My day job allows me to also like fund whatever I need to fund. Like if I need to pay for something out of pocket, like if we got to buy paint for $70 from the store so we could repaint the walls for the gallery space, like I have the money to do that because of the other work I'm doing too. So I can also use like that work that I do to fuel these other, passions, I guess, of mine, because they're all interrelated. Like my teaching is related to the community work I'm doing. It all has the same core intention. Actually, I did want to kind of segue to your teaching job, because you are teaching art, right?
And could you explain more about what you do, who you teach to, and all of that?
Yeah, so this is my first full year, my second year at James Lick High School, which is in the Eastside Alum Rock community, so Eastside Union High School District. And last year, I was finishing up my student teaching the first semester, and I had been at Santa Clara High School before, and with my mentorship there, I didn't feel supported, and I had tried to teach a unit on the intersections of social justice, racism, and the history and photography, and I felt very shut down for being able to teach that. So I was like, okay, well, can I potentially switch schools so that I have, I really want during my student teaching to expand and really push myself and challenge myself to teach this kind of content. Mm-hmm. And so I was placed at James Lick High School, and I remember when I was first placed, like the first week, I was like, wow, this is like way different than the population of Santa Clara High School in terms of, like behavior, a lot of gang issues at the school. And I remember like I was still in my teaching program at the time, and this girl that I was in the program with was like, oh my God, you're at James Lick. Like I was there last year and it was so terrible. And I was oh God, like what did I get myself into? Like I did, I was only a couple days into my student teaching, but I didn't really have much context. And then I was like, every day I would go, I was like, I love these kids. Like I started to really connect with these students. And something that I have learned from like my upbringing and my, I'm originally from Sacramento, but like from my elementary education and my high school education, both, I never had a single teacher that looked like me. Like it took me to get to college to have like a Latina teacher. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, I had mostly like white, maybe like one or two Asian teachers growing up. So I never saw myself like reflected in like these people that were educating me. And so I felt, as I was teaching at James Lick, knowing that it's primarily a Latinx community, mm-hmm. Just because of the color of my skin, the kids are going to feel a different kind of connection to me. Right. There's just a common ground that you share, knowing that like, okay, we're both people of color, we both experience like similar struggles, right? And I started to like see the spaces that these students, the wisdom that the kids are bringing to the space based on their experience, despite having like all these negative narratives, because James Lick has a huge reputation in the East Side in general of being like ghetto, being a dumping ground, like all these really traumatic narratives that like mm-hmm. the kids carry with them, whether they're like, aware of it or not. Right.
I think East Side San Jose is kind of not as affluent as other areas of San Jose, right?
Yeah, as a whole, there's definitely little pockets, like affluent communities, like Evergreen High School is like known to be a more affluent school, like but there's definitely ways of over time that, I mean, through like the zoning or whatever historically has happened to get these marginalized communities in like pockets, mm-hmm. and to keep resources away from them, which is just structured into San Jose and how it was built. But working with these kids and really starting to understand like, whoa, these kids, like they're incredible people and they're resilient and they've like been through a lot of shit, and mm-hmm. they have a lot going on at home, and they have like language barriers, and they have, they don't have the things that like I had growing up. And a lot of them are like, they don't necessarily even want to be at school, because the system has never served them. And so really like what I had discovered through being a teacher at James Lick is like, it's really not even about what I'm teaching, like in terms of the academic content. Mm-hmm. It's really about like what relationships am I building, just like with my community work, right? Just like getting involved in the art scene is like, what relationship am I building with them, and like what do they need, and how can I support them, and how can like we work together to do something that's like to serve them, to mm-hmm. fulfill like a need, or whether a kid is really interested in art and I know I can like really help challenge them as an artist or a creative person. And I've had a couple of students like interested in pursuing art, which I'm like, oh, that's so great. Yeah, go for it. And one girl, she had decided, because her counselor had told her, oh, don't do art. You can't get a job. You should do psychology. And then she ended up switching. And I was like, you should have talked to me. Like, right. We could talk about, careers in art. But even then, like a lot of my kids, they show up and they literally don't want to be at school. You know, they're failing every class. They get in trouble all the time. They get kicked out of their classes.
Yeah.
And then that's, you know, a lot of times what happens is like they get in trouble. It goes on their record. And there's the school to prison pipeline where like things start getting on their record.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it's all logged because everything is in a database now. Like referrals are all in a database. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a very interesting journey, like really learning to connect with these kids and seeing that I can be a model in their life of like love and understanding like they don't have to take everything so seriously, and, you know, showing up to a space every day, whether you want to or not, there's something that you can get out of that experience.
For sure.
And just like really just at the end of the day, wanting them to know that I love them when they leave the room.
What's very interesting is you provide like a safe space for people to kind of think about things outside of academics, right? Because you're asking about their health, their day, what's going on with like what they're eating for breakfast, all of that. And having that space to focus on themselves, to express with art, right? Whether it's bubble wrap, spray paint, whatever, like they can express themselves. And I think that's what's amazing about art. Because like having an art class is totally different from math, physics, biology. People are allowed to express themselves, and yes, there's a grade after you finish that class, after you graduate or whatever. But there's just so many more opportunities with art to express themselves and to create something, you know, whether they want to do it with clay or spray paint or anything. So I think that's what's important about art, important about music, important about all these extracurricular activities. And this kind of I want to segue to, you know, the Eastside Union High School District. You just had that meeting on Thursday where they were thinking of budget cuts.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like what happened and what was the conclusion? Because I guess talk about the backstory and all of that.
Okay. So I want to say it was the beginning of the school year. We were told that we were going to have budget cuts, and there was a lack of transparency in terms of what that meant, or where the numbers were coming from. And there was a day I remember the superintendent came to our school because he was going to different schools to like talk about these cuts, and the superintendent sent us this spreadsheet that showed basically like current positions and the positions that they're proposing to lay off.
Right.
And I remember reading it and being like, what? Like they're gonna lay off almost every custodian, every single advisor, every single counselor, every single parent outreach specialist, athletics directors, activities directors, very vital roles to our school, right? And to our students' social emotional health, to their academic achievement, to their athletic growth, like for those that really want to pursue their sports,
the extracurriculars,
right? All the extracurriculars, right? So I remember seeing that and like not really taking it seriously. I'm like, that can't be like real. That's like their worst case scenario proposal, right?
Okay.
Knowing that there will be like teachers laid off as well, but not knowing how many, right? So they purposely were leaving everything so vague. And then I want to say, so at this point, still there was no communication to families that there's budget cuts. Like,
right.
Maybe about 3 weeks ago, I started telling my students about them, and they had no idea. No one had told them. Like, over $23 million of budget cuts in our school district, and nobody is talking about it.
Yeah, they're trying to do it behind the scenes or something, right?
Trying to do it behind the scenes, keep it quiet, keep people uninformed. And what was even more surprising is like the principal didn't reach out and tell communities or parents. Other teachers weren't talking about it to each other or to the kids. And I'm just like, this is weird. Like, why is no one talking about this? This is just strange to me. Because I was mad. I was like very pissed off about the situation. And I was just trying to inform the kids. I showed them a graph of or this chart that showed the ranking of the states in the US and how they fund education, and how California is 39th in that list in terms of per pupil funding, and how we have the 5th largest economy in the world, and yet we're ranked 39th in per pupil funding. And there's
something off about that, like
right?
our prioritization on education is not that high.
No, it's terrible. And at the end of the day, they basically voted to continue with the cuts. They
all the cuts that they were suggesting.
Yeah, because you're literally laying off every counselor. So those are the kids that they advise the kids of like what classes to take.
Yeah, and maybe like a lot of like what college to go to, what major, all of that.
Exactly.
Right?
If you lay off every counselor, like how are the kids going to have that support, right?
Yeah, that's going to be hard to navigate. Like,
how I've been explaining it is like it's not about me. It's because I can find work, I can find jobs, I'll be okay. But it's like the kids, they don't have another option. They have to stay at that school. Like they can't go somewhere else. I agree.
Yeah, I think the call to action, like for anyone who's listening, if you have family, friends, like parents that have kids in those schools, like they should, speak up. Yeah. Speak up and just make sure that their voices are heard, and maybe we can reverse some of that.
Yeah, hopefully.
Because the students are the future, and like if we're not giving support to the students, that's going to be bad for their future, for our future, for the city of San Jose. Yeah. Like I think in that case, like we all have to at least chip in to keep that community strong, especially the supporting roles, because like even though they're taking math class, physics, stuff like that, like the supporting roles are especially extracurriculars, like counseling, sports, art, like those are what kind of keep people away from the streets, keep people interested in things that they might pursue in the future. And so I think we should at least try to take some action, speak up if possible.
I mean, these cuts are happening all around California because again it's a statewide issue, and I mean it's a bigger issue in terms of funding education, but it's just unfortunate that it continues to most deeply impact the communities that they are already lacking resources or access to those resources.
I really wonder if like you have to create your own community, your own set of like opportunities for the students to find these extracurricular activities outside of school funded, school supported, school sponsored ways. I think like with Martha Street Art and like creating all these different communities like outside of school, maybe we can try to make up for the things that are being cut.
And I want to definitely like continue to support, whether or not I'm laid off, like I definitely want to continue to support like that community and seeing like how I mean, I've even thought of mentorship programs between like San Jose State and students in the East Side, right? Like why is that not existing, or why are these partnerships not happening between really like vital organizations or groups in our communities or in San Jose? Like even and again, like we can't necessarily expect of like corporations because they're their own entities, but I think the state really needs to do a better job, and the city needs to do a better job of like supporting people that are trying to do this community work and like trying to do the hard work, because it's really like comes down to the money side of things. Like how do I of course can have this idea of a mentorship program, but if there's no funding for it, or if I don't have funding and then I have to seek the funding, like where's that money coming from? Because I could do the organizational side, I could do the administrative things, but it's like the money, like we need money in the world to function, right? It's like catch-22. But
I think that kind of goes back to our first kind of topic about like if there's a vision, there's a mission, and people really believe in that, they there might be opportunities where the funding won't matter, and you can kickstart that, right? Like students who want to volunteer, create a club within San Jose State, and people are volunteering, kind of like like fraternities that do community service. They're like Alpha Phi Omega things. They do that once in a while, and it's really cool what people are doing. You never know what kind of people have the same mission, same vision.
That's true. Alignment. Yeah, that's something that definitely probably the two biggest takeaways from like my last couple years of teaching and community organizing is like building relationships is vital. And intention is so important, like understanding the people you're working with and what their intentions are, and is like that intention rooted out of community, or is it rooted out of ego? Because sometimes it's both. But I'm always looking for that like community element. Like even for like Martha Street, when I send out the Google form, I have a question about like, what does creative community mean to you? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I take that very seriously, because like we're not all just here for ourselves. Like we cannot expand and grow in isolation. Like as individuals, we can only expand and grow together. And what is our like our community intention, and how do we like how do we manifest it, and how do we work together to do that? And that's kind of like the mission. I'm also working on my master's, and like on my way here I was kind of thinking through like my thesis, because I need to start working on it because it's due in a month, but
good luck
procrastinating with that. But like it all comes back to like this rootedness and like our intention and in community. For me, so for my thesis, my whole grad program, I focused on art education and the intersections of wellness and social justice. But beyond like the more specific scope of art education, I've really seen this thread between like creative endeavors and like art making, being a creative person, and how that's connected to like our liberation as we can like express ourselves authentically, show up as ourselves, and do that with each other and co-create. Imagine new worlds like where we can be ourselves and have liberation for all. And also like actively informing each other of oppressive histories and like contemporary issues that are happening that continue to oppress our own communities and others, because it really comes down to like solidarity. We have to show up for each other, whether or not, even if we don't feel it directly impacts us, it does. And so figuring out like how to navigate all these worlds of whether it's like the nonprofit world or public education system or philanthropies or like grassroots organizing, like all these things, it's an ecosystem. And how do we find like a common thread where we can uplift each other and not burn out and not be like in this competitive mindset all the time, because there's so much like scarcity mindset that there's not enough when there's really like abundance everywhere. Right? Like there's people like you that like welcome others into their home and like allow them space to share their story and what they're trying to do. Right? So there's people that are actively trying to connect with others and provide platforms for them. And I think they're just like, there needs to be more of that, and there needs to be more of us holding space for each other and listening. Like that's another big lesson. Like listening is a huge thing. Like being present is part of that, but like just really being present and deeply listening, and not just hearing the words, but like hearing what's being said, because those are two different things. And then being able from there to respond and like hold space for that. Openness, inclusion, community, like it all revolves around that. So I wish you luck on that. Thank you. I'm looking forward to what you have in store for Martha Street Art, good luck with the education space, and I really am looking forward to everything. Thank you so much. We're going to have a fashion show in the springtime, and we're also going to have a Woman of Color Creative Showcase. We're still thinking of like a cute name for both of them, but I will keep you in the loop of those. But I'm really excited to like continue to at least work with what I have. I'm like, of course, there's a lot of like bad shit that happens in the world all the time that's out of my control. And all that I can control is like what's in front of me. And all I can do is like love the people around me. And have spaces where we can do that together. Cool. So if people want to follow you on social media, on Instagram, websites, where should they go? So I have a website, artandflow, artnflow.com, and then I have my Instagram, which is artandflow. I think it has 2 W's. It may have 3. I'll put it in the show notes. 2 or 3. Something like that. Because my email has like 2 or 3, and then my Instagram has like one more. I don't know. Right. And then there's the Martha Street Art Night Instagram page where you can we'll continue to promote our events through there. I try to also use it as a platform to communicate other events, but also like what other issues are happening in our community, whether it's like the Google protests or whether it's things such as like the budget cuts. So using it also as like a platform for informing. So stay up to date with Martha Street events through that page. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Jessica, for coming.
Thank you.